What would you do if the person who spent years telling you to get serious about life turned out to be on your payroll the entire time and chose your grandmother's 80th birthday party to say it out loud, in front of everyone? I'll tell you what I did. But first, let me take you back to the beginning, because this story doesn't start at the party. It starts about 6 years earlier, in a tiny flat in Newtown, Wellington, where I was eating 2-minute noodles for the fourth night in a row and absolutely refusing to admit that maybe, just maybe, I was in over my head. My name is Isla Pemberton. I'm 28 now. Back then, I was 22, freshly dropped out of my second year of a commerce degree at Victoria University, and I had what my mother called delusions and what I called a business plan. I'd been freelancing in brand strategy and digital content since I was 19, picking up small clients here and there, mostly local cafes, and a few Etsy-style makers who needed someone to help them look professional online. I wasn't making much, but I was making something, and more importantly, I was learning faster than any lecture theater was going to teach me. The decision to leave university was not popular in my family. My mother, Diane, cried. Genuinely cried. At the kitchen table, with a cup of tea she'd forgotten to drink, just looking at me like I'd announced I was moving to Mars. My father, Callum, went very quiet in that particular way of his that meant he was deeply disappointed, but was going to choose not to say so directly, which somehow felt worse than if he'd just shouted. My grandmother, Nana Ruth, who has always been the emotional compass of our entire extended family, patted my hand and said she trusted me, which was the kindest thing anyone said to me that year. And then there was my older brother, Callum. Callum is 4 years older than me, which made him 26 at the time. He had a proper job, a real job, as he liked to say, with audible italics every time the subject came up. He was a project coordinator at a mid-sized construction firm in Lower Hutt, wore a collar to work every day, had a KiwiSaver he talked about, at family dinners like it was a personality trait, and genuinely believed that the correct path through life was the one with the most visible structure. He wasn't cruel about it, at first. He was just very, very certain. You can't build a career on vibes, Isla, he told me. At Christmas that year, loading his plate with Mom's pavlova, like he was punctuating the sentence. At some point, you need stability. Super! Sick leave. A manager who actually has to legally treat you fairly. I have clients, I said. You have 3 clients, he said. One of them is that candle lady from Petone. The candle lady from Petone, for the record, is now a wholesale supplier to 14 boutique retailers across the North Island, and I helped her build the brand identity that made that happen. But I didn't know that yet, so I just ate my pavlova and said nothing. That was the pattern for the next few years. Callum would make a comment, usually framed as concern, usually in front of at least 3 other family members, and I would absorb it and redirect and talk about something else. He wasn't the only one. There were aunties who asked when I was going to settle into something real. There were cousins who seemed genuinely confused about what I actually did for work. There were family dinners, where the question, "So, how's work going?" I was asked of everyone else with genuine interest, and asked of me with a slightly tilted head and lowered expectations baked right into the tone of it. I kept showing up, I kept working, and I kept not talking about how well things were actually going, partly because I didn't want to jinx it, and partly because I'd learned that nobody was particularly interested in hearing about it until it became undeniable. By the time I was 25, I had quietly incorporated Faded Crown as a proper agency, not a freelance side hustle, not a one-woman operation pretending to be bigger than it was, but an actual registered company with actual staff and actual retainer clients. We specialized in brand strategy, content, and creative direction for mid-market New Zealand businesses wanting to compete in a digital-first space. Within 18 months, we had 7 full-time employees, a studio lease in Torrey Street, and an annual turnover that would have surprised most people in my family very much indeed. I didn't announce any of this at dinner. I know that sounds strange. But here's the thing about being underestimated. For long enough, you start to protect your progress instinctively, the way you'd cup a match flame against the wind. I wasn't hiding my success out of shame. I was protecting it from a particular kind of family noise that I'd learned, through experience, had a way of making you doubt yourself at exactly the wrong moment. Mum knew, in a general way, that things were going well for me. I'd told her I had staff, that I had a lease, that I was doing okay. She was proud, I think, though she expressed it mostly by telling me to make sure you're eating properly and asking if I'd set up a proper accountant. She hadn't fully absorbed the scale of it, I don't think. It's hard to fully absorb something you don't have a frame of reference for. Dad had come around slowly, the way he does. He'd stopped asking when I was going to finish my degree, which in Colin Pemberton terms is roughly equivalent to a standing ovation. Nana Ruth had asked me once, about 18 months into the agency, to explain exactly what I did, and I'd sat with her for an hour over tea and walked her through it properly. She'd listened to every word, asked surprisingly sharp questions, and at the end said, "So you're helping people tell their stories in a way that actually works." And I said, "Yes, that's basically it." And she smiled and said, "That sounds like something worth doing." Callum, though. Callum had not updated his file on me. As far as he was concerned, I was still the little sister who dropped out of uni to do digital stuff, who was perpetually one slow month away from having to admit the whole thing hadn't worked out. He wasn't malicious about it. I want to be clear about that. He was operating on old information and had never been particularly curious about acquiring new information on this subject because the old information fit a story he'd already decided was true. He'd moved into a new role about 14 months before Nana Ruth's 80th birthday, senior project manager at a consultancy that had recently merged with a larger group. He was proud of it. Collar was crisper. The KiwiSaver chat was upgraded to include talk of portfolio diversification, and there was a new energy about him at family gatherings, the kind that comes from someone who feels they've finally arrived somewhere. What Callum didn't know, and what I had not had any reason to tell him, was that the consultancy he now worked for had been acquired 8 months earlier by a holding group that included, as one of its brand and communications subsidiaries, Faded Crown, not in any way that made me his day-to-day manager. There were several layers of organizational structure between my agency and his team, but contractually, structurally, on paper, the company that signed off on his division's operating budget was mine. I found out about the overlap about 3 months after the acquisition, when our operations manager flagged it during a routine briefing. She asked if it was awkward. I said I'd let her know. I hadn't told Callum. There was no easy moment to do it. And every time I'd tried to construct the conversation in my head, it came out sounding either like a gloat or a threat. And I didn't want it to be either. I thought, eventually, it would just come up naturally. It came up at Nana Ruth's 80th birthday party, in the function room of a winery in Martinborough, in front of approximately 60 members of my extended family and their partners. The party was on a Saturday, in early March, late summer, the kind of evening where the light stays golden for hours and everything smells of dry grass and good wine. Nana Ruth had been talked into allowing a small party, which in our family means 4 tables of 15 with a sit-down dinner, a slideshow that made 3 people cry, and a speech from my father that was lovely, but about 4 minutes too long. I'd arrived a little after 5, driven down from Wellington that afternoon, and found the venue already buzzing. Cousins I hadn't seen since Christmas. Aunts I hadn't spoken to properly in years. Nana Ruth herself seated near the window, in the champagne-colored dress she'd bought specifically for the occasion, looking quietly radiant, and pretending not to notice that everyone kept wanting to take photos with her. I hugged her first. She held my face in both hands and said, "You look like you haven't slept enough." I told her I was working on it. She told me to stop working so hard. I promised to try. Dinner was warm and loud and lovely. I was seated between my cousin Priya and one of Nana Ruth's oldest friends, a woman named Margaret, who had the kind of sharp wit that sneaks up on you, and the conversation never flagged. I ate well. I drank 1 glass of a very good Martinborough Pinot, and then switched to water because I was driving back that night. It was during the gap between dinner and dessert, when people were standing up and circulating, that it happened. Callum had been in high spirits all evening. He'd made a toast earlier that was genuinely sweet and had made Nana Ruth laugh twice, and I'd felt warmly toward him in that uncomplicated way you sometimes can with family when the evening is going well. He'd moved over to the cluster of uncles near the far end of the room, and I'd watched him doing what he does in those settings, talking with his hands, clearly holding court about something. I was standing with Priya and 2 of my younger cousins, Bex and Tom, who are both in their early 20s and in that delightful stage of life where they're very curious about everything. Tom had been asking me about the agency, genuinely interested, asking smart questions about how I'd structured the client acquisition side of things, and I was enjoying talking about it more than I usually allow myself to. I didn't notice Callum had drifted over until I heard his voice behind me. "Still the content queen, are we?" I turned around. He was smiling, glass of red in hand, the particular smile that means he's about to say something he thinks is funny. "Works good," I said simply. "Isla does brand strategy," Tom told him helpfully. "She runs her own agency. She runs her own small business," Callum said, in that gentle, corrective tone, the emphasis on small landing soft and precise. "Which is great. Very creative, different strokes and all that." He took a sip of his wine. "I just always think, at a certain point, you want something with a bit more structure behind it. Super. Actual progression. That kind of thing. It's easy to get comfortable in the freelance world and not notice the years going by." "I have staff," I said, "and a studio, and I incorporated 4 years ago." "Sure," he said, nodding the way people nod when they're not really listening. "But it's still just you at the wheel, yeah? That's a lot of pressure, with not much net under you. I just worry, is all." He looked at Priya, including her in the gentle benevolence of his concern. "You know how it is. When you're working in a proper organizational structure, you get a different sense of what sustainable actually looks like." There was a small silence. Bex was looking at her shoes. Tom had gone very still. "A proper structure," I repeated. "No offense," he said. "I know you've made it work for you. I'm just saying, from where I'm sitting now, managing a team, dealing with real budgets, real accountability, it's a different world." And there it was. The thing that had been said in various forms, at various tables, for 6 years. Real budgets, real accountability, real job, real career, real structure, real with my life, and my work positioned permanently on the other side of that word, soft and unserious, and slightly to be pitied. I felt something settle in me. Not anger, exactly. More like clarity. I took out my phone, not dramatically, just the way you'd check a message. I opened my emails and found the one I was looking for, the organizational chart that our operations manager had sent me 3 months earlier, with the note flagging the overlap. I scrolled to the relevant section. "Callum," I said, "which division are you in at work? Just remind me." He blinked slightly, surprised at the turn. "Infrastructure advisory." "Why? And you're senior project manager on the Henderson contracts at the moment, yeah? You mentioned that at Christmas." "Yeah," he said, a little slower now. "Okay." I turned my phone so he could see the screen. I'd pulled up the subsidiary structure, clean, plain, nothing dramatic about the document itself. "So this is the organizational structure of the holding group that acquired your firm in August last year." I let him look at it for a moment. "You can see the parent entities listed on the left. Faded Crown is listed there as the brand and communications subsidiary, which is what gives us board-level sign-off on operating budgets across the group." I paused. "Including infrastructure advisory." Callum stared at the screen. "I've been meaning to mention it," I said. "I just wasn't sure of the right moment." He looked up at me. The color had changed in his face. Not dramatically, but enough. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that the company that signs off on your division's budget is mine," I said. I kept my voice completely level. I wasn't performing anything. I wasn't enjoying it the way I might have imagined I would, once, years ago, when this conversation had lived in my head as something satisfying and sharp. I was just telling him the truth. "I'm not your day-to-day manager. There are 3 layers of structure between us, and none of this affects your role. But I thought, given we're talking about real budgets and real accountability, you should probably know." The silence that followed was the loudest 30 seconds I've experienced in a long time. Priya had gone completely still. Tom looked like someone had walked into the room carrying something unexpected, and he wasn't sure whether to react or pretend he hadn't seen it. Bex was staring at Callum with an expression I can only describe as fascinated. Callum said nothing. He looked at my phone. He looked at me. He opened his mouth once and closed it again. "I'm not saying this to embarrass you," I said quietly. "I mean that. I'm saying it because I'm tired of the qualifier. I have built something real. It has structure and accountability, and a very functional KiwiSaver provider for all 8 of my staff, including the 2 we hired last month. And I would have told you sooner, but you never really asked. He put his wineglass down on the nearest table, carefully, like he needed something to do with his hands. I didn't know, he said. Finally. I know you didn't. I should have asked, he said. The words came out slowly, like he was working something out in real time. I had an idea of what you were doing, and I never really checked whether it was still accurate. No, I said. You didn't. Another long pause. That's Isla, I'm sorry. He said it simply, without a lot of ceremony around it, which is how Callum apologizes when he means it. Not just for tonight. For all of it. The way I talked about your work. I was doing that thing where I'd made up my mind, and I wasn't bothering to update it. I looked at him for a moment. My older brother, who taught me to ride a bike in the driveway of our old house in Karori, who let me watch scary movies with him when I was too young for them, who had also spent 6 years gently, consistently, publicly implying that my professional life was somehow less than serious. Thank you, I said. That actually means something. Priya made a quiet sound that might have been relief. Nana Ruth, as it turned out, had been within earshot of at least part of the exchange. The acoustics in the room were not ideal for private conversations. When I went to find her a little while later, she was sitting back at the table by the window, and she took my hand when I sat down beside her and didn't say anything for a moment. You never told us, she said finally. I didn't want to make it a thing, I said. You should make it a thing, she said. Not for them. For you. You are allowed to take up space, Isla. You've earned it. I didn't cry. I was close, but I didn't. Later in the evening, after the cake had been cut, and the speeches had wrapped up, and the room had loosened into the easy sprawl of people who had eaten well and were no longer on their best behavior, Callum found me near the door, where I'd stepped out to get some air. The evening had cooled, and the stars over Martinborough were doing what stars do when you're away from city light, which is make everything feel slightly more serious and more beautiful at the same time. He stood beside me without saying anything for a bit. I've been thinking, he said eventually, about the last few years. I think I needed you to fail, he said. It surprised me enough that I looked at him. He was staring out at the dark garden, not consciously. I didn't want bad things for you, but I think some part of me needed the story I had about you, about the 2 of us, to stay the way it was. Because in that version, I was the one who had it figured out. He paused. And clearly, I didn't have it as figured out as I thought. This is the thing about Callum that I sometimes forget. Underneath the certainty and the KiwiSaver energy, he is, when he forces himself to it, genuinely reflective. I don't need you to have failed, I said. I never wanted that. I know. I just wanted you to see what I was actually doing. I know that too, he said. I'm sorry it took me this long. We stood there for another few minutes, not talking, which felt okay. The sounds from inside drifted out. Nana Ruth, laughing at something. The clatter of glasses. Family, doing what family does. Before I drove home, Nana Ruth hugged me for a long time at the door. The way she hugs when she wants you to carry something with you. 80 years, she said against my shoulder. You know what I've learned. The people who kept going when nobody was watching. Those are the ones who end up with something real to show for it. I held her a little tighter. Happy birthday, Nana. Go home and sleep, she said. And eat properly. I drove back to Wellington along the dark valley road. The hills either side of the Ramutakas, solid and familiar. And I thought about the word real, and how long I'd let it mean something it didn't have to mean. Real isn't defined by structure given to you by someone else. Real isn't a salary band or a job title that fits neatly on a business card. Real is what you build, what you sustain, what you show up for day after day, without the guarantee of a safety net telling you it's going to be okay. Real is 7 people who trusted you enough to bring their working lives into something you made from nothing. Real is a grandmother who listened for an hour and understood it in a sentence. Real is being able to stand in a room full of people who underestimated you and feel no need to make a performance of proving them wrong, just a quiet, clear-eyed willingness to let the truth speak plainly when the moment asks for it. I've thought a lot, since that evening in Martinborough, about the particular silence that followed what I said to Callum. Not a cruel silence, not a triumphant one. Just the sound of a story that had been told a certain way for a long time, suddenly having to make room for something more accurate. That kind of silence, I think, is what growth actually sounds like. Not loud, not dramatic. Just the shifting of something that had been in the wrong position for too long, finally finding somewhere true to land. If you are in a family where your work is quietly condescended to, where your choices are tolerated rather than respected, where the word real is used like a door held just slightly closed against you, I want to say this clearly. You do not have to convince anyone on their timeline. You do not have to shrink your ambition to fit the frame someone else built for you. You do not have to announce your wins to people who haven't been paying attention. You keep going. You keep building. You stay honest and specific, and a little bit stubborn in the way that good work requires. And if the moment comes, and it may come, at someone's 80th birthday, in a function room in Martinborough, with the Pinot Noir open, and the stars just starting to show you, tell the truth calmly, without cruelty, and let it do its own work. That's enough. That has always been enough.